Hi guys, it's Lisa with the $100 House, and today I am going to share with you part 3 of how we bought our house for $101. We're not real estate investors. This is not something that we do on a regular basis, but it's a wonderful story and I made a promise that I would share it with you, so I am working on doing that. If you'd like to hear the beginning of the story, you can check out parts 1 and 2 that are already up on the channel. And if you'd like to see the house, there's a tour of the downstairs and the upstairs, and then we've got a little bit of the improvements already up and lots more to look at. In part 1, we talked about the fact that kind of the backstory of us wanting to buy a house and why we were willing to buy a house that needed a lot of work. And then in part 2, we went through answers to prayer number 2 through 5 that really tell the middle part of the story of moving forward with buying the house. So today we're gonna pick up on part number 6. And that is, okay, so we've established the fact that the opening bid on the house was $100. And then my mother-in-law was willing to help us because we had to come up with the balance of whatever we bid within 30 days. And while we had some places that we could get some money from, ours wasn't a fluid way of getting money. And so we needed to be able to know for sure that we had a way to get funds within 30 days to buy the house. So we had that. So now the next thing that we had to come up with was an amount. When you're going into an auction, you have to have a check for 10% down of whatever you're willing to bid up to. And so how that works is, say you're willing to spend, and we weren't, but let's say we were willing to spend $200,000 on the house. Well, then we would need to have had a check that day for $20,000. And then within 30 days, we would have to send them an additional $180,000. And now, if you were willing to spend up to $200,000, but the house only went for $100,000, and you have a check for $20,000, well, then you would just go ahead and give them the whole $20,000, but then you would just obviously have less money that you needed to give them within the 30-day time period. And so when I talked to the lady that was in charge of hosting the auction, she had said that she recommended maybe having 2 checks, one for 10% down of your larger amount, and then possibly even a different one which would be all of your smaller amount if, say, maybe it sold for smaller. But either way, we had to have checks. We had to have at least 10% down of what we were willing to bid up to. And so since it wasn't just me that was buying the house, and then it was also my husband and my mother-in-law, between the 3 of us, we had to decide, well, yes, we could get money. How much could we get in 30 days? How much are we willing to try to get? And just because you're willing to pay a certain amount doesn't mean that you can or anything like that. But no matter what, you have to say, this is the amount together that we're willing to bid up to. And while I'm not going to tell you what that amount was, it was maybe not as much money as what we really should have come into the picture with, but we knew we didn't have, a lot of money available. Plus, we knew that even if we bought it, we have to put a lot of money into it in addition to the actual purchase price. So we had to weigh all of our numbers and options, and finally we did. We had to come up with a number that we were all comfortable with. And so I had a number, but I didn't say what it was right away. My mother-in-law said what her number was, and we were within $5,000 of each other. So we worked together and we came up with a number that we were all comfortable with. So I was really happy, and I felt like it was the right number to get, we both had come up with a very similar number. So that was answer to prayer number 6. And I'll be honest with you, there was, we did all that the week before, and there was another week before the actual auction day. In fact, there was a second open house, and we went to the second open house again so we could get another look. And interestingly enough, once again, There was no one at this open house. It turns out, I didn't know it, that the caretaker that we had met was actually just opening the door and closing it for the lady in charge of it, but we never did know that until later. Couldn't quite figure out why it was that there was never anyone there. And as much as, I wanted to be excited that we could maybe buy this house, and I had so many prayers going on with it, just didn't know, And so I started doing a lot of praying. And at one point, my sister-in-law, who had come and seen the house with us originally, she calls me, she goes, "Lisa, you're going to buy that house and it is going to be beautiful." Well, I hoped she was right. But I told you that my husband and I had sat and talked about the kinds of ways that people could get a loan against the house, and the types of loans that maybe could be gotten, and how much money they could get against the house. And we weren't willing to bid that much, because we weren't going to use this to make money off of. We were going to be nickel and diming it to try to live here. So we had to be very smart in, okay, even if we pay this amount of money and then we put this amount of effort into it, it's still only going to be worth this amount of money. The town that we live in is a nice little town, but we live in the Midwest. We don't live in California or on the East Coast where, I've seen it where just like a lot is worth $700,000. And I can promise you, you could buy most of my town for $700,000. Well, maybe not, but certainly a whole block of houses. And so we had to be very careful. You just can't overbid, because then you've got more money in it than it's worth right off the start. And you don't want to be upside down on a house that's got a hole in the roof, There was a lot of praying, because we really kind of felt like, if an investor was interested in the house, that we weren't going to be able to outbid him, even if we had a number and it was a solid number, but that didn't mean we would be able to buy the house, So the auction was on a Tuesday, and a lot of praying, a lot of asking other people for help with praying, but we didn't want to say too much, because you don't want to tell too many people you're looking at this house, because you don't want them to come bid either. In fact, I had thankfully talked my friend out of bidding on the house. She was kind of interested in it, and I was like, oh, it's a lot of work. You're already a house that you're working on. And I was really happy when she finally told me, she's like, I'm not going to bid against you. She's like, I'd like the house, but I won't bid against you, and I know you want the house. And my brother-in-law said the same thing. He's like, I want the house kind of, but I won't bid against you, and so you go, you buy it. So that was helpful. I had ran off 2 people from the auction, but neither one of them would have actually been willing to pay what we were willing to pay for it anyways, so it didn't matter. So we were really investors that we were worried about. So that night before it, honestly, I finally just came to a conclusion of praying that I was like, you know what, God? If you want us to buy this house, the opening bid, and I had gone and researched how to bid on a house, that if it's the bid's $100, then it's and one. So the first person just has to bid $101. And I was like, okay, Lord, you know what? If no one else shows up at this auction and we get to buy a house for $101, everyone's gonna know that you bought me this house. And everyone's gonna know that it's because you made this choice for us, that you were willing to open this door for us. And no one's gonna question how it happened. I'm telling you this video, but I'm sure all of you are like, well, that just doesn't happen. Somebody must have given it to you. And they did. God gave us this house. But that was my prayer. I was like, everyone's gonna know it. Everyone's gonna know that you bought this house for me if no one else comes to the auction and we get to buy it for opening bid. And I promise I'll tell people if that's what happens. So the next morning, the auction was at 9 a.m. And let me tell you a little story about how I'm never on time for anything. But we were at that auction ready to go at 8:30 in the morning because I had watched somebody else's auction real estate investment house thing, and they didn't know where to go. And so when they got there, they had to walk all around the courthouse, and they finally found the place, and they almost missed their auction. And I was like, oh no, that is not going to happen to me. I am not going to do all this praying and work and effort and then show up and miss it because I'm at the wrong corner of the courthouse. My mother-in-law came with us because she was, my husband did not want to come to the auction. Doesn't like to go do things, if you know. But my mother-in-law's like, I'll go with you for support. So, and because she had, was going to help us with the funds, she actually brought a check. So she was going to pay all of it, and then we were just going to work out a way to pay her back. And so we went there, and I didn't know where to go. So I went all the way into the courthouse, and they sent me up to the sheriff's office because most of the auctions are tax auctions that are held by the sheriff. And so I went up to the sheriff's office and I asked them, and I was like, do you know when this is? And the lady looked at me, she's like, I don't know what auction you're talking about. We don't have any sheriff's auctions today. And I was like, well, it's actually a marshal's auction or something. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, they're usually on the courthouse steps over in this one place. So I went down there, and by the time I got back down, the marshal and the lady that was in charge of the auction was here. Actually, the marshal wasn't there, just the lady in charge of the auction was there. So we went and sat down, and we waited. And I prayed about it and prayed about it and prayed about it and prayed about it. And about 5 minutes till 9, the marshal showed up. And so he sat down with us, and it was just the lady holding the auction, the marshal, my mother-in-law, and I. And we're all sitting there. And it's 9 o'clock. And here I'm assuming at 9:01 they start the bidding and then it's over, right? About that time, someone comes running out of the sheriff's auction, or the sheriff's office, which I'm still wonder today if I tipped somebody off. But anyways, they come up and they say, oh, some guy just called and said he's on his way. Can you wait? And they're like, oh, sure, we'll wait. Darn it. So there was a lot of chit-chatting back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I have to be honest with you, I was sitting there not trying to be, too pushy or mean or anything like that. In fact, I was sitting there quietly. But part of my head was like, we're just waiting and waiting so this person can show up and outbid us. Because if it's this kind of person, it's probably an investor, because if it was somebody that wanted it like I wanted it, they would have been there on time. So it's probably someone with deep pockets who just buys things and invests and then, leaves and, flips it and moves on. But they would have more money than me. And I'm like, no. So finally at 9:20, I prayed hard about it, and I'm like, okay, hey, how long do we have to wait for this person? And the lady that was holding the auction, she had been the one that I talked to on the phone a couple of times. And she finally was like, I think so. We've waited quite a while. I think we should start with the auction. And the marshal seemed a little reserved to do that, or reluctant, but then, okay. So we had to read all this stuff about all the terms and conditions of the sale and all this. And the whole time I was thinking, hurry up. Somebody's going to come. The person's going to show up, and they're going to come, and they're going to outbid me. And I just want to buy the house, and, praying for it over and over again. Lord, please, 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 please. And then he finally got done talking, and he said, okay, well, who will start the bidding? And my mother-in-law did the bidding. She's like, I will pay $101. And he's like, does anyone else want to bid? And I'm like, well, we're together. And he's like, I don't. He goes, and so going once, going twice, sold. And we had a house for opening bid for $101. And God had definitely bought us that house, because about 3 minutes later, the guy came up and said, oh, I'm here for an auction. And they're like, oh, we're sorry. The house just sold. And it was ours. And that was it. And yes, we did have to pay the taxes for 2019, because that's the year we bought it. But it wouldn't have mattered if we had paid $100 or $2 million. You would have still had to pay the taxes. And they weren't behind. They had been paid all along. It was just the actual year's taxes that weren't due until August. So it wasn't like we were, if you buy a house from a person, then it's prorated and they help pay up until the time that they owned it. And that wasn't the case. You had to pay the whole year's taxes, but they weren't very expensive. So, I mean, it wasn't like that was a lot of money either. And anyways, so that was answer to prayer number 7, and obviously the biggest one, when we were the only ones that showed up to bid. And the lady that was selling it said that in the years that she had done this, she had never seen anybody else buy it for opening bid. There'd always been at least a couple of people that showed up and bid it up a little bit. So I knew it was an extra miracle at that, because we don't live in a very populous area. So if it was ever going to happen, it would have been in this area. But she said that it never had happened before. So I do want to leave really quick, because there was a song by Christy Nockels. She used to be from Watermark, that I found kind of as I was waiting. And the lyrics in it said, it's talking about how God was going to be faithful again the next day. And somehow the night before, it just kind of struck me that he was going to be, and I knew that even if 20 people showed up and we didn't buy the house for $100, $101, that that God would be faithful, and that would be exactly what he wanted, and that he had something else for us. But sorry to kind of, but if you are like us and you've been kind of, I won't go into it, but there was another house we were supposed to have had when we first moved up here, and it was part of the motivation for coming, and that ended up going very sour, and things not in our control changed. And so when you've been waiting for a long time to get not just a house, but just when you feel like a lot of opportunities had kind of fallen away from you, with no fault of your own, and then when God redeems it in such a unique way, you really feel like he's looking out for you. And don't get me wrong, like I've said before, there were so many other ways that, so many steps along the way that I would have liked to have had go our way, and they didn't. And then when I see how it all worked together in the end, it makes it all worthwhile. And really quick before I go, I just wanted to say, this house, I've got some stories about it, but it was a repossession from some other people who unfortunately could not pay their bill. And while I am totally amazed and thankful that we were able to buy this house for next to nothing, it means that another family is not living in this house. And I happen to know that there were some other just heartbreaking things that happened in their family before they lost the house. And so I always want to be very sensitive of the fact that I know God has opened doors for them in other ways, and I hope that he continues to do that. And also the house, I will tell you a little bit more about it in other videos, but we found out recently that it was built as a school that didn't work out. So there's a lot of disappointment in this house, and even some abuse that happened by another owner along the way. And I looked at the house and I'm like, this house is full of disappointment and hurt and sorrow, and it had a hole, and it had windows knocked out, and yet we were so thankful and so thrilled and so just excited to be able to just take this house and make it ours. And I compare that so much to my own life as a Christian. And when I look at my life and the disappointment and the holes and the horrible things that have happened in our own lives and how we're sinful people, and then yet Jesus just wraps us up and says, hey, I'm so glad to have you, and I'm so glad you're mine, even though you came with all these problems. And anyways, thanks so much for coming by, and I hope you'll stop by. I'm not real good at home improvements, but I've got a lot of house to continue improving, so I hope you'll stop by and see how that's coming. It's finally getting somewhere thanks to our current stay-at-home status. There's more time to get things done, and I thank you so much, and God bless.